but certainly the dismemberment of children who've been hit by aerial attacks is just as ghastly.
Then we got used to attacks against the UN staff. It became the new normal. Many people would call and you don't know how to react.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We'll start with an event notice. MEC, which sponsors this program, and Promoting Enduring Peace, are holding an event called Art and the Syrian Revolt, Friday, the 16th of November. This is from a photo by Bassem Kabia, who fled Ghouta, Syria. He'll be showing his photos and speaking at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, along with Dylan Connor, who traveled to the Jordanian-Syrian border this year. And this professional musician will also perform, all free of charge. See pepeace.org for details. There are reports that another Saudi journalist has been murdered by the regime. His name was Turki al-Jasser. According to Middle East Monitor and several British newspapers, he had been arrested in March after Saudi authorities infiltrated Twitter headquarters in Dubai and found that al-Jasser had run a blog that investigated royal family corruption. The claim is that he was tortured to death recently, a month after the murder of Khashoggi. The President of the United States has promised severe punishment to those guilty of the murder of permanent U.S. resident Jamal Khashoggi at some unspecified time after the investigations are done. Well, before that happens, we can all unite behind a simple demand. The Saudi government should return the body of Khashoggi to his family. The president surely has enough clout with the Saudis to insist on this favor, actually this elemental duty. We don't need to wait to see who's guilty and who did what. Surely, with 18 people behind bars, the Saudis know exactly where Khashoggi's remains are being kept. And while they're at it, the Saudis should release the other bodies ghoulishly being kept from their grieving families. The European Saudi Organization for Human Rights estimates that the Saudis are keeping back 32 bodies after execution. A petition has been created with the simple message, return the remains of Jamal Khashoggi and all those killed by the Saudi monarchy. Go to thestruggle.org for the link. Note, the petition is talking about the people individually executed by the Saudis, not the thousands and thousands killed by Saudi bombs in Yemen, nor those who died of starvation in that country or of disease.
The dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi was so ghastly, and it made people realize that the Saudis would go to great lengths to cover up, to obfuscate, to delay any kind of action. But certainly the dismemberment of children who've been hit by aerial attacks is just as ghastly. The strangulation of Jamal Khashoggi was also horrible, but essentially when children...
And called attention to what's happening in Yemen.
And when children die from starvation, it's basically asphyxiation. So I think we have to be sure to keep on promoting the possibility that these children's lives could be spared.
Kelly and others picketed the Saudi mission to the UN 3 days this week, and at one point blocked the doors. In New Haven, Connecticut, these are photos of a large rally on the Green, one of hundreds around the country whose purpose was to preserve the Mueller investigation from an expected assault by Trump and his loyalists after the firing of Jeff Sessions. Move On, Indivisible, and other groups were chief organizers of the event, which was wildly popular around the country. Move On claims a total of 100,000 people took part in these demonstrations. Great to see people out on the streets. Now to Palestine. This young man, Mohammed Abu Sharbain, killed by an Israeli sniper in Gaza. And at the Palestinian Museum, U.S. in Woodbridge, Connecticut, the unveiling of a memorial to a medic killed by another sniper.
Rizan al-Najjar was the daughter of Ashraf al-Najjar. She was also the eldest of 6 children. She lived in the Khuzat neighborhood of Gaza. I don't know if you guys have heard of that neighborhood, but if you know about the 3 military onslaughts against Gaza, this neighborhood in particular was targeted, especially during the summer of 2014. Because of financial and societal restraints, Rizan was not able to attend university. Instead, she completed 2 years of paramedic training and trained herself more or less. And despite the social and political restraints of difficulties that face young women in Gaza, both in terms of their own societies and in terms of the military occupation exacerbated by military onslaughts, she was able to become an emergency medical aid worker and a paramedic. Last summer, Rizan was volunteering as an unarmed first responder, helping victims during the Gaza March of Return. If you guys don't know what the Gaza March of Return is, we encourage you to look it up and to consider what the protesters are risking their lives every day for. So in an interview about the Gaza March of Return, Rizan al-Najjar explained, "We have one goal, which is to save lives and to educate people, to send a message to the world that without weapons, we can do anything. Your conscience will be comforted as much as possible, since God always knows one's intentions." On June 1st, Rizan was shot and killed by the Israeli military while she and other medics were approaching the border fence in order to treat wounded protesters, with their hands up wearing white medical aid vests. Rizan was 21 years old. We are incredibly honored here today to have a mosaic that was made in her honor, and Faisal will be uncovering it right now.
Yeah, the Palestine Museum US has commissioned this piece of work in memory of Rizan al-Najjar. Now we will unveil it.
And now from a few weeks earlier at the same museum, a talk by Mohammed Eid, who is a UNWRA worker from Gaza.
One of the things I got used to since I was young is that there is always a crisis, there is always something happen, and we never see them as a crisis. We just see them as a way of unexpected thing, and we go party when something like that happens. We're used to our houses being flooded every time it rains. And when it happens, we act immediately. We take our stuff, what is left or what is staying, what is left dry, and we leave immediately. Sometimes it's too late and we need help to leave. We go to the UNWRA schools, and I just loved when I was young to go to the UNWRA schools with my family. It's imagine how would it feel like you go to school, but you're not going there to study, you're not going there to do all the homework and all the work, but you're going with your family. When I was a child, I never saw that as a problem. On the other side, I enjoyed it. When I grew up, I started feeling bad about it. People come to the UNWRA schools because this is the only shelters that would host civilians. Of of course, the UNWRA would provide them with aid and support. Among the other things I got used to it is that I would spend the night under shooting and bombing, and I would wake up in the morning, walk outside of my home on people shouting on us to leave the home, and I would see a bulldozer progressing through the camp streets and coming towards my house. I would be watching him until it gets very close. I become very certain that my house will not make it, and then I leave with my family. The roads were very narrow, so they would just drive their way through the houses and knock them down. People would leave immediately, take anything they can save with them. Sometimes we would take, if we're having a long walk, people would try to help and provide us with carts that is dragged by donkeys. I have a friend who sarcastically calls it the Cadillac. So when the military operation ends or finishes, and sometimes it's so intense, we leave immediately. There is aerial bombing, there is air strikes, and so people don't check on everyone. They just leave immediately, and then they discover that they have missed someone. We get back immediately. We start looking for people mainly. We start shouting for them, we're calling for them, and most of the time they come back to us, they answer us, and they stay alive. The situation is very dangerous. Most of the time we'll be looking around for people, and we have unexploded bombs around us. And sometimes we just ignore them. We don't feel a threat. We don't feel they might go off any moment and destroy the whole neighborhood. The crazy thing is that for a human being, all it takes is just 10 grams of bullet to kill a human being. This bomb is around a ton, 1,000 kilograms. 2,000 pounds. It's just way beyond a human body or a human being can take. One of the things I've learned when I was young is that women are very strong and resilient, and strong women and strong mothers would raise strong children. I was amazed whenever we get back and we find that people were killed and we go for the funeral, and I would see that women are making zaghruta in the funerals. And I would ask my mom, I've always wondered about that, and she never answered me. And then I asked her at some point, I was like, why women would make zaghruta in the funeral? This is not a happy celebration. And she would say to me that for people who were killed during the war, they're actually not dead. They're still alive and they're still aware of everything happens to them. When they bring them back to their homes, it's very inappropriate to say goodbye to them while they're crying and they're being sad for them. As a way of sending them away or saying goodbye to them, it would be to give them the zaghruta. They wipe their faces before they get them into the houses. And then once the dead person leaves the house, all the women break into tears. It's just amazing, the resilience and the power of the Palestinian women. One of the women, she insisted on carrying her own son to the grave. And one of my friends, he told me that he said to her, "You're a very old lady and you can't carry him. We'll do that for you." And in my culture, it's very inappropriate to drive a dead person in a car. It's just the culture. It's the way people think. He has to be carried on the shoulders of his brothers, his cousins, and his friends. So his mom insisted that she will carry him. She was over 90 years. She will carry him to the grave. And then his friends said, "No, we'll do that for you. This is very intense. You can't do it." And she replied to them saying, "I already carried him inside me." One of the things I got used to it is that after the military operation, the UN cars and vehicles will drive in and they will do the evaluation, the assessment, they will report on the human rights violations, and they will provide us with the aid. One of the things we would be waiting for, and one of the most important things they would provide us, would be the tents. They would always provide us a place to go and build the tent and stay in until we find another place to move to. And then most of the people refused to do that, and it wasn't until I grew up and until I realized that was part of the trauma, that was part of the shock. People, when they lose everything, when they lose their houses, when they lose everything they have worked for in their lives, they're very unlikely to leave it and move away immediately. So they will put the tents just right next to the house where they have lost everything, where they have lost members of their families, and they will stay in there for months until they accept their loss, accept the trauma, and then they decide to move away. It was part of actually the recovery, healing process, acceptance, sort of. I grew up and I worked for the UNWRA. I started working for the education department as a teacher, and then working for the development program in the education department, and then I was transferred to the emergency response program during crisis and rise of conflict. We always had a response plan. We always had things on paper to be prepared for any crisis. Never we managed to exactly predict what's going to happen. The last response plan the UNWRA had in Gaza Strip was to host 5,000 refugees in the refugee shelters. Just open the schools, turn them into refugee shelters, and host 5,000 of them. This is the second or the third or the fourth day of the 2014 military attack on Gaza Strip. I'm going to play a short video for you and show you a glimpse of the scale of the attack. So if you have a look at the start time and the finish time of the bombing, it started at 4 GMT and finished at 5. In 60 minutes, the whole neighborhood was destroyed. And the first week of the war, the UNWRA had the 5,000 refugees, the 5,000 displaced persons. That was within the first week. The war lasted for 50 days. By the end of the war, the UNWRA had 300,000 refugees, 6 times more than the capacity of we have trained and we have prepared for. Of course, when the bombing starts, some people are killed, and the rest of the people will immediately start evacuating, and they will head to the UNWRA schools. One of the things I've learned about living in that place and working for that organization is that there is always a consideration for the gender. There is always separation for gender issues. The culture, based on the culture, men will always give in more space, more privacy for women. So women will stay inside, women and children will stay inside the rooms, will take most of the privileges, while men will just prefer to sit outside. We have provided rooms, we have provided venues for men, but they also gave it to women to have more space, and they decided just to stay outside. Sometimes they would just sit down on the streets, lay down on the streets. They wouldn't even sleep in the rooms. They would literally sleep on the streets out of consideration. The UNWRA would provide them lots of services, lots of important and significant and critical services, starting with number one would be water. You will be surprised when I tell you that the most critical need during the war was drinking water. And when the UNWRA asked for assessment for the humanitarian needs, and they were informed that it is water, they were surprised, and they were not paying to convey water from another country. We're just having a chance to bring aid from another country. And then everyone stressed the importance that all we need is water, is drinking water. So this convoy is the drinking water coming from Jordan into Palestine, into Gaza Strip through the borders. You just ship water from one country onto another because the power stations were bombed, the water filtration stations were bombed, everything was destroyed, and people couldn't find drinking water. So During that war, most of the people would have volunteered. We were not emergency response specialists. We were teachers. We started out as teachers. We were doing office jobs. We were teaching kids and children. We were doing different things. But again, this is our community. This is our society. If someone is going to volunteer and do something about it, it is absolutely the local staff. During the war, we have worked in the schools. We used them as refugee shelters. I remember on halfway through the war, the military assault, I received a call from a friend. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to show you just a short video about it.
This was a clearly marked United Nations school where 3,000 people had sought shelter. The UN called it criminal.
It's incomprehensible. How can this continue to happen with all of this information? We've told them 33 times exactly where the shelter is, the last time an hour before the strike this morning. How does this continue to happen? I mean, we've called for an investigation, we'll call for an investigation again, we'll condemn this outrageous act of violence, but how can it keep happening?
So this place has hosted 3,000, and I cut all the parts of the video that shows the victims and shows the photos that might or the scenes that might be disturbing for some of us. This refugee shelter, this school, has hosted 3,000 people, and on day 33 it was bombed suddenly. He says we have told them 33 times that exactly were those schools. So every morning we woke up, first thing in the morning, we informed the headquarters, the UN headquarters, about we tell them that this refugee shelter is still a refugee shelter and we're still having refugees on site. They immediately inform the Israeli army, and they know about the places and coordinations of those shelters. They had a clear information about that. On day 33, the school was bombed. That was in Rafah area. And one of my friends, when he called me, and I was in another area, and he said, that was early in the morning, and he said they bombed the shelter. And I imagined they just bombed the side of the shelter. And I said, okay, well, what's the next? Are we evacuating shelters now, or what's happening? And he said, no, it's so crazy, I can't even figure out things here. And I said, what do you mean you can't figure out? And he said, bodies everywhere. That's what he said to me. And literally, if you follow on that report, if you search that on YouTube, the full report will show the bodies of children, of civilians, of adults, just everywhere, because it was a very crowded refugee shelter. One of the things I got used to is that then we got used to attacks against the UN staff. It became the new normal. Many people would call, and you don't know how to react at the beginning. It doesn't matter how much you were trained, how much we were prepared, how much we thought about it. When it happens, when someone calls us, when someone calls me and he says, for example, someone has been sent to a front line or a conflict zone to evacuate people or deliver aid, and he calls in and he says, well, we have been informed that his car was bombed. Or he tells me that they bombed one of the shelters with white phosphorus, which is a flesh-eating material, substance. It's a chemical thing. It keeps burning for days. And when he tells me that, I just turn into a child. I wish if he could just tell me what to do, tell me where to hide, or hide me away, do something for me. It's crazy how vulnerable we are in such crises. It takes a long time for us to wake up again and realize what is happening, and then try to act. And then when you try to act, what would I do? If they're bombing shelters, should I evacuate shelters? Is it the new plan now? But then where are we going to take them? We have thousands of them. So it was intense and crazy. At some point I said, when someone called me and he said, they have bombed a certain shelter. And I said, okay, what's next? What's the plan? And then we were talking about it and trying to help each other. And I said, well, if there is no emergency services, if there is no ambulance, if there is no paramedics in that area, then just get the locals to take the victims to the hospital. And he said, well, haven't you heard? They bombed the only hospital in that village. And that was in Rafah area and in many other areas. If you search that on Google, on Rafah Black Friday, it's called Rafah Black Friday, they bombed the main hospital. and we had to evacuate the patients. I know some patients who were injured twice. So the UNRWA had a policy of banning and prohibiting any recording or taking photos on site. Most of the photos I've used here, all of the photos I've used here, are taken from news agencies, and I found them on Google. You can find them as well yourself. It's illegal to take photos on sites and of beneficiaries at the UNRWA, because the UNRWA tries to maintain the dignity of the beneficiaries. Beneficiaries are very traumatized. They are very sensitive people. They have been through a lot, and a way of maintaining their dignity, we're not allowed to take photos. If you take photos, you will see an orphaned child who was sent by his grandma or grandfather to take the food package. There is no other person in his family to do that for them. You take a photo and you see a widow who have lost her husband. She's being so sad that she is the one who has to come and stand in line and ask for the food for her children, or receive the food package for her children. No one wants to do that. No one enjoys doing that. It's definitely something very intense and harsh for those people, but this is the only thing they would do. Out of consideration, the UNRWA doesn't allow anyone to take photos for people during service and operation. Some of my friends have been asking me, you're talking about aid that is really very simple. You're talking about flour, lentils, chickpeas, oil. How critical is that? How much does it contribute to real development on the ground? I mean, the UNRWA has 7 complicated, integrated programs, but when we break it down to the simple things, the most important 3 programs would be education, healthcare, and social services.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.